think about my story often, and I'm like, man, God's timing, like the divine timing sometimes of when opportunities present themselves, even when you least expect it. And I tell a lot of young creators now, I'm like, you can't have your nose up at any opportunity just because it doesn't meet every single mark you're looking after, because you have no idea where that will lead you.
Confidence is so important in what you do. And that's the only way people are going to believe that you're good at what you do. If you believe you're good at what you do.
Yeah.
It's like getting your hair done. I don't want you to play in my hair and you don't know what you're doing. Like, don't play with my hair. Like, don't do it. I could tell you don't know what you're doing. Don't do my nails like that. I'm being like little silly things. You're just like, you don't know what you're doing.
No.
So you're at AFI, you leave, and are you flooded with offers, or people is there a whisper about this beautiful, smart go-getter on the streets from UNLV who's ready to take over? What happens and you stumble upon Issa Rae?
You're like, how does this happen? Well, just life. I mean, honestly, so I think what's important to note is that I graduated from AFI in 2012. I'm 24 years old, and that year is important. And the reason why is that I'm a millennial to a lot of ways, and in the years prior to 2012, digital was just becoming a thing, right? I tell people in 2011, when YouTube invested $100 million into 100 YouTube channels, to me, that began the true, I think, convergence of what became digital media. Because prior to that, no one was investing in that space. There wasn't any money being spent on content for the internet. No, it wasn't a thing, which sounds crazy because it's only 12 years ago, but it just wasn't. But I'm aware of that in my last year, right? I was working and helping with some YouTube creators on stuff. And, I'm really thinking about what am I going to do post AFI? And look, the one thing I knew that was true, which is the traditional path, the usual path in entertainment is, even if you get a degree or you just moved here and you never discovered film, you try to get in a job as an assistant, you try to get your job at a mailroom, at an agency, like you try to get your foot in the door in these entry level positions that at least give you access, and wherever you go from there is a deck of cards, right? And I knew that, and I went, no ego, but I'm really good at this producing thing. And I feel like if I go and take those jobs that are 40, 50, 60 hours, I don't get to produce. I get to learn. I get to build a network, but I'm stuck on someone's desk and not able to apply all of this great things that I just learned. And I want to do more of that. And I've always been broke. I'm not afraid to be broke for a few more years. And when I saw what was happening in the digital space,
hold on,
it's true. I was like,
hold on, Missy. Hold on. I don't sell
just,
that dream. I don't listen to you, but I love it because we've been broke and we know what it feels like. But I don't ever want to go. I don't want to go back. But you weren't afraid to be. Look at this mindset. It's just genius. I'm not afraid to be broke. I want to hustle.
Well, I mean, it's when it's what you always know. I was like,
Yeah.
I mean, okay, like eventually I'll make money, but it wasn't the motivation, right? It was like, hopefully this thing leads to paying the bills, but you know what? How do I just stay afloat what? I remember doing a budget after coming out of school, and I was like, well, how much do I need to make just to pay the bills to survive? And if I could just make that, that's it. Like, I'm not trying to save for a house right now. Like, that's it.
Wow. That's
So,
beautiful.
but I say that because, I see what's happening in the digital space. I'm torn about what I'm supposed to do, what's traditional in terms of the entry level positions. And I said, well, let me think about this. These web projects that they're spending money on, I mean, they're not millions of dollars. They're like 50K, they're like 20K, right? Like, they weren't giving loads of money to creators for digital content. And, my AFI thesis film was $75,000. And so I was like, well, what's the difference between the work I just came out of AFI doing at these budget levels and this digital content? And you know what? That's work. And if I can get jobs in the digital space, even at that budget level, well, they got to pay me something. It's not like I'm working in that for free. And I had the option to basically consider a freelance career. And I said, I'd rather take my bets for the next year or two and freelance as a producer, see what jobs I can get to be hired, for a project or two, as long as I make enough money to pay those bills, and see where that goes. Because even if that fails, I've always felt like, and it's maybe the Vegas in me, but I'm like, I can always get those jobs. Those assistant jobs ain't going nowhere. That is just how they've always stayed
Ever.
there. So why not? Why play it safe and just do what everyone else is supposed to do versus what I really feel like doing, which is going to now apply my skill sets to real things and practical things that I feel like I'm very capable of doing. And so that decision led me to applying to a bunch of things online that were like on Craigslist, on Mandy, but it was like producer for a music video, paid, boom, send my resume. Producer for this, paid, send my resume. And just being like, I'm just going to apply to like 20, 30 things. And actually had a friend who sent me another job, and it was from a Google group, and it was like a web series looking for a line producer, paid. And he was like, I saw this out of you. I know, we recently connected, and I told him I was going to go freelance for a little bit. And so I sent my resume to that job. And that night I got an email back from a woman named Issa Rae. And she was like, hey, I got your resume for this job. Could you meet for it the next day? This was on a Friday. She wanted to meet on Saturday. And I was like, absolutely, scheduled the interview. And then I Googled her because she didn't mention what the web series was. I wasn't really familiar with who was emailing me, right? It just could be some creator. And what I discovered was season 1 of Awkward Black Girl. And at that time, Issa had a little bit of press about her in the show. And so I did all my research. I watched every single piece of content on her channel. And I essentially showed up to that interview being like, look, I don't know who you're meeting with. This is just who I am. This is all I want to do. This feels like the perfect opportunity. And I never forget, she has a very different perspective. I mean, she's like, girl, you showed up in a Massimo tank top. And I was like, I don't remember any of that. What I remember is, I remember
I was
when we
professional.
met. Yeah, right? I was like, did I really wear that? But in what I distinctly remember is telling her that I was graduating in 2 weeks. Like I just finished my classes, but I was like, yeah, I'm graduating from AFI and the Wednesday after next. And this is what I plan to do for the next year or two or however long. And so long story short, we hit it off. And the next day she sent me an email and said, they had already started production on season 2. There were 3 episodes in, and she goes, we're shooting episode 4 this weekend. Here's our budget. Like, basically jump in if you want this job. And so I did. And we started working together that week. And I came in episode 4 of season 2 is the first episode I produced and obviously continued on through the rest of that season. But I am so grateful because, I mean, talk about timing. I think about my story often and I'm like, man, God's timing, like the divine timing sometimes of when opportunities present themselves, even when you least expect it. And I tell a lot of young creators now, I'm like, you can't have your nose up at any opportunity just because it doesn't meet every single mark you're looking after, because you have no idea where that will lead you and what that could bring you next, or what that relationship will continue to evolve into, and obviously meeting Issa when I did, it changed my life. I look at the trajectory I'm on now, and there's no way I can't point to that and say that opportunity has everything to do with it. So I'm very grateful for it. But yes, that's essentially how we met. And over the next 3 years, I was a freelance producer, and I continue to work with Issa on a lot of different things. We started a company together at that time called Color Creative. But when I wasn't working with Issa, because this is also pre-insecure, Issa was also trying to, build her own career. She didn't have a ton of money either. And so a lot of that work, I'd get paid here and there, but to pay my bills, I was a freelance producer. I did music videos. I did a lot of short films. I did a lot of other digital content for other creators and these digital networks. And every time Issa called me with something, I was like, let's do it. But that wasn't my full-time job either. I was a hustler. I had to figure out how to pay these bills and just got all of this experience, which was just incredible.
Oh God, I love this story. I'm so excited. The way you're telling it, I'm visualizing it. I'm there with you while you're hustling. And I could only imagine going from school to a job, literally a job. And you were doing the same thing at AFI, but now you're working with different people. And there are all these other dynamics that come into place that weren't necessarily in there when you're in a different type of environment that's a little more controlled. But you
Mm-hmm.
work with Issa and you freelance over the next 3 years. When do you get, in your opinion, because you had a series, your resume is so long and so colorful and beautiful. You get a series of gigs. And for our listeners, most notably, everyone knows of the Black Lady Sketch Show, and
Mm-hmm.
you've been nominated, I believe, 4 times. Am I correct? For
Yes,
Emmys.
one for Insecure and 3 for Black Betty Sketch Show. Yeah.
Okay, with my Emmys, and I'm still in my early 30s. I love it. Okay, wait a second. So then, so then this is like a lifelong dream for so many people. I think of actors who we've watched since we were kids who just recently got their first nomination and or win. I think of somebody like a Shirley Ralph. You know what I mean? Just like it's
Hmm.
just incredible to think about the frontier that you helped build, starting with YouTube and that digital space. Like you said, just 12 years ago, but still, like Issa will tell you, that was it, right? And that changed everything. And now everybody's an influencer, everybody has a YouTube page. But you now, you now get this. How do you get this production deal? And correct me if I'm wrong. I want to know what that deal looks like and why did you want a production deal? I often hear people say, like Robin will say, I just signed a multi-year deal with HBO, or Issa did
Hmm.
the same. What does a production deal mean for the lay? Keep it super simple for me. Like you sign this production
Simple.
deal and that entitles you to do what?
Yes. Excuse me. We should add the caveat. So, post Awkward Black Girl, I continue to work with Issa for the next 8 years, right? That's Insecure, that's a
Mm-hmm.
Black Lady sketch show, that's
Mm-hmm.
everything that came with it, which was glorious, crazy years because it all happened so fast. And then in 2020, I left my post kind of running Issa's production company to launch my own. And so what you're referring to is probably Reform Media Group, which is my pod. And the first thing I wanted to do was go find a deal. And so a production deal is very important for anyone who chooses to be a producer. It's specifically, at least for me, when I'm not a talent, I'm not a writer, I'm not a director, I'm not a multi hyphenate where I have another talent that I can lean on and generate income outside of producing, right? Usually you can figure out a way to do both. And so when you are an independent, like non-writing producer, like myself, um, these production deals provide the financial stability to do what you do because they are essentially an exchange of an advance of certain money that can go towards your overhead. So I can put myself on salary, I can hire an assistant, etc. In exchange for me exclusively working with that studio partner. And so, when people see those, know that it's like the holy grail of producing. It's not like everybody gets a deal. But why they're important is because if I don't have a deal, I can develop and try to get projects made all day long. But we know how hard that is independently. And even then, the average person doesn't understand that as a producer, I can go sell a TV show tomorrow. I can have a deal for that show, and it's going to say I'll get X amount of money per episode. But the caveat for me as a producer is that it's when it's made. So you know how shows can spend 2, 3, 4, 5 years in development.
Yeah.
The writers, yeah, the writers getting paid during that time. Whoever the producer, I'm working on it. I'm giving notes. I'm trying to figure out how we're going to move this along. But that entire space, I don't get paid for development. I only get paid when they decide to make that, right? And so when you are a producer building a slate, and I'm at the mercy of these studios greenlighting our projects in order for me to pay the bills, well, if I don't have a deal that's helping me like make money in the interim, then I will be broke. Like, how do you survive? Right. So that is what these production deals consist of. That is why they were important. And it's what I sought after once I left my very cushiony, lovely position with Issa and said, I'm going to go try to do something that I actually forgot about for a very long time, which was my own dream to have my own company and figure out what stories I wanted to tell. But in order to do that, I was like, well, how we gonna pay these bills? Because now I felt like
Well,
I was
but you,
22 year
but
old
you,
Denise
wait.
living that.
I thought we didn't mind being broke, Denise. What happened?
We
We got
didn't, we
comfortable.
didn't. But here's
Okay.
the thing, Cari. But you got to remember too. You're at a point in your life where now I've built a little bit of success. I was used to having a steady income and extra fees, right? Like I was at a place in my life where
You
I
could get
finally
extra
reached
guac.
finance.
You could get extra guac on your Chipotle. You could get a
Exactly.
vente. You get.
1000%. I'm not out here trying to find the best flight deals. I'm over here being like, I want to fly with Delta because I like Delta. So like, like decisions are different. Decisions are different. It's like going from Spirit to Delta. You're like, oh, I move differently
Ah,
now. But to that point, once look, at any point in our lives, once you hit financial stability, the hardest thing, even if it's not what you love doing, etc., is to unattach yourself from that and really pursue your dreams and your goals, right? And so again, I felt like it was cyclical where I'm like now in a moment where I'm like, okay, I want to do this thing, but I understand by doing it, I'm gonna have to take another risk. I'm gonna have to say this lovely, paycheck I'm getting, like I'm just gonna go for it. And
Mm-hmm.
this is where that mentality comes from, where I was always like, what's the worst that can happen? I can try for a year or two. I'll probably run out of money. If I don't get a deal, I can always go get a job. And Issa was like, girl, you can always come back. And I was like, thank you, Jesus, because I just needed to make sure that I had backup if nothing else. But I just decided like, well, what else do I have to lose, right? If I always try to make my decisions around money, I'm never going to be happy, because that's not what it should be about. It should always be about what makes you happy. What are your intentions? And I'm willing to risk it all to get there. And I just wanted to be one of those people that I could look back and say, at least I tried, versus what would have happened. And I don't want to live the what would have happened life.